So the role of the CEO is always, you're responsible for everything, period. There's no excuses. There's no delegating.
Love it.
You're ultimately responsible for every single part of the business. That doesn't mean you literally do everything with your hands. So you have to decide where to invest your time and your energies. Where do you have a comparative advantage and what's most important asymmetrically could create upside or downside. So you always filtering what you do, but fundamentally there are no excuses.
Welcome to Season 2 of Limited Supply, the place for refreshingly real takes on what D2C is really like.
We're your hosts, Nik and Moiz. Let's get into it and start making money.
Growing your business is hard, but Triple Whale is all about scaling your Shopify store to the moon and doing it profitably.
Okay, what I'm supposed to read is it says use promo code SUPPLY15 to get 15% off when you sign up for Triple Whale at triplewhale.com. But I really mean DM me on Twitter and I will get you 20%. I'm going to go fight the CEO and I'm going to be like, get 20% off of these guys. So just DM me and I'll get you 20%.
All right, everybody, we are back. A Season 2 special. The man himself, Keith, the Berries legend, the PayPal legend, the Square legend, the Open Store legend, the Open Door legend. How are you doing, Keith?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm still a little winded from that Berries class.
Ready to do another?
Let's go after this.
Perfect.
And Moiz is joining us here from Texas. What's up, Moiz?
First virtual podcast that we're recording, so I hope it goes well.
Awesome. All right, should we jump into it?
Yeah, I'd love to. Keith, super excited that you're on. Nik and I usually don't have guests on. We've only had one guest in the past named Harley, who is a president at Shopify. You're the second guest on, just generally because we feel like people don't bring a ton of honesty to podcasts. But I feel like you and I feel like that's not going to be the case with you. So super excited that you're here.
I'll try to give you real views.
I appreciate that. Just before we started recording, I mentioned that I met you once back when you were at Slide. You know, you've been at PayPal, Square, Open Store, Founders Fund, Khosla. Can you tell us how you got into e-commerce? Like all of those things are not e-commerce. How did you get into Open Store?
Yeah, no particular reason. You named a fair variety of companies, PayPal, Square, LinkedIn. I've been involved in companies like Yelp. There's no pattern. The only thing that really appeals to me is interesting, ambitious problems and interesting, ambitious people. Put the combination of the two together, and I'm interested, regardless of what it is. I've funded things in genomic sequencing. I've funded things in healthcare. I've funded an enterprise software company or two, which is not my favorite thing to do. Obviously, Open Door is a commerce transactional engine, but I don't have any religious views about what interests me other than ambitious, talented people.
What is it about some of the crazy ideas that makes you want to throw a check in? And how much diligence do you do? Because I saw a tweet the other day where you said, if you see a good idea, you don't even ask, you just throw a check.
I generally talk about my criteria for investing is that about half of my VC friends should think my investment's ridiculous and laugh. That's how I know I'm taking enough risk or I'm seeing things that other people are missing. And it's a good filter because you can usually tell whether your friends would laugh at you.
Right.
So it works pretty well as a proxy. Diligence does vary by stage of company. Typically, I prefer to be investing as early as possible, keynote deck and team. So obviously limited to a keynote deck and team, there's not that much diligence you can do. Series A, there's a little bit more diligence. There may be some product metrics. There's probably not financial metrics typically. So really, if you're an early stage investor, the idea of doing significant diligence is silly anyway. But the value proposition I bring as an investor and the way I like to compete with the rest of the world of investors and VCs across the planet is by assessing the talent and the abilities of founders. So that's the only thing I really care about. So once I've made a decision about the quality and caliber of the founders, everything else is just extraneous. So the tweet I talked about was there's a time back in my day at Khosla Ventures where we were pitched by a very accomplished founder who is clearly first rate. He actually reminded me a bit of a clone of Max Levchin. So there was no doubt about his ability as a founder, but the technical challenges he was confronting were something way outside my sort of realm of expertise. And I had partners at KV who knew a lot more about AI-oriented X, Y, or Z, and they were pretty dubious and skeptical. So I was hesitating on investing for about 2 weeks, kept going back and forth and thinking about it, chewing on it. And my chief of staff at the time, Delian, walked into my office one day after a Monday partner meeting and said, "What the hell are you doing? Like, if I've learned anything from you in like the last 15 months, is that if you find a world-class founder in a big opportunity, write a check. So stop asking questions." I was like, you know what? You're right. Give him a term sheet right now. So, I forgot my own principles, which was the point of my tweet, that it's easy to get distracted with a lot of noise versus like my only job is to figure out whether this person is likely to be a world-class founder.
You mentioned talking about working for really ambitious projects and really ambitious people. You're probably one of the few people who's gotten to get to know Elon and Jack Dorsey in a personal way at different businesses. I remember when I was in law school, Cass Sunstein once told a story about Barack Obama right after the election in 2009. And the entire class, it was an admin law class, the entire class was typing and was not paying attention at all to Cass Sunstein. And as soon as he mentioned Barack Obama, the room went silent. There was nobody typing on their keyboard any longer. And they were like, what is this story going to be like? Can you tell us a crazy story about Elon Musk and a crazy story about Jack Dorsey?
Well, I didn't work that closely with Elon. Elon had already been displaced as CEO of PayPal, but was still on the board of PayPal. So really only in conjunction with board matters, like things that would be elevated to the board level, did I get to know him.
Sure.
I did work with him a little bit when he was starting SpaceX. I thought about joining SpaceX and actually contemplated moving down to Southern California back in 2003, but that was a very long time ago. Jack, obviously, I worked with very closely, but I don't think there's any crazy stories. I think Jack has an amazing set of abilities. The most distinguished thing about Jack is he is a world-class business mind, technical mind, and design mind. And that Venn diagram overlap is literally rounds to zero in the world. So that's why Jack's been so successful. So typically people have different characteristics that allow them to compete. And once they isolate that, they want to double down on that as much as possible. So for example, Max Levchin, I remember when I first met with him in December of 2000. So after I joined PayPal, about a month or two in, I presented something to him. And I remember Reid Hoffman giving me this advice going into the meeting saying, Max is about one of three people in Silicon Valley that is a first-rate business mind and a first-rate technical mind. So be careful. And don't think you're going to be sharper or smarter on the business side than he is. But he's basically there aren't people in Silicon Valley, and this is only a couple months in my Silicon Valley career, there aren't people like him. And this was when Max was 23, and Reid Hoffman knew it right then and was able to articulate exactly why Max was going to be so successful. So you can pick up on these traits very early in people's career. It was the number one lesson from that. And then B, when you find those people like Max, keep working with them. So I went to work with him at Slide, as you alluded to, and then help fund. I led the first institutional round for a firm, and I'm still on the board of directors of a firm.
How many unicorns have you funded?
I don't even know. Probably depends whether you include angel investments and venture, 20 to 30, 40. I actually can't track. It depends whether you also need liquidity or you believe these paper markups over the last 3 years. So that's why it's hard to answer.
Yeah. Can you talk about your management style at some of these companies? How do you prefer to lead companies, or how do you set up your structure when you were an executive at some of these companies?
It's changed over the years, but the most important thing I learned in management is hire amazing people. And then you don't have to learn how to manage very well. It's like basketball or baseball or whatever.
Is it something you enjoy? Do you enjoy the act of managing people, or you'd rather hire a team to manage the team and you'd rather do your own thing?
No, I enjoy recruiting, assessing, and promoting people and working with osmosis to teach. But qual management is boring and not that valuable. Truthfully, this is a lesson from PayPal. Peter Thiel taught me this lesson actually the first week I worked at PayPal, which was November of 2000. We went for a jog around the Stanford campus. And he asked me, sort of what I thought of the company, and I gave him some feedback, and he articulated two theories of the world that were pretty critical for the rest of my career. One was you never want general management ability. You want to promote people based upon their discipline and their craft, excellence at their discipline, excellence at the craft. So the best engineer becomes the VP of engineering. The best designer leads the design team, et cetera. And so I strongly believe that when you're trying to solve problems, you want people who are extraordinary. And that's what leads to these proverbial 10x breakthroughs. So I really enjoy working with 10x people and work pretty closely with them. I will brainstorm, riff, remix, lots of ideas all the time. I will wake up at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., or 5 a.m. with a riff on a conversation I had that day and hopefully a good idea and a good solution. So I definitely enjoy that. But the process of actual management is mostly like an error correction model. So Netflix has this famous culture deck, from a decade plus ago. When they talk about it, most parts of management, most rules and processes are designed to prevent mistakes. I really don't want to be in the mistake prevention business. I want to be in the asymmetric value creation business.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I've always been taught there's the CEM, which is clarity, equipment, and motivation. Is there any type of rule you follow around management there?
Well, clarity is critical. So one of the things I believe in is transparency. So if you want people to make decisions, you need to be clear about what the goals are and how well you're doing. And you want to broadcast that information to literally everybody in the company as often as you can. So Jack Dorsey started at Square this process, which I really like, is we would send notes from every meeting to everybody in the company, so everybody had more context. You want dashboards throughout the office, clearly articulating how well you're doing against your core goals. You want to draft a business equation that actually explains how all the moving parts of the business connect. And you want to teach this down to the customer support level. So one of the things I also believe in is weekly company meetings. We did this at Square. They were very well, prepared, where part of the goal was to teach everybody in the company so that everybody's on the same page and can understand how everything linked. If you want people to make the same decisions you would as CEO or COO or CRO, you need to ensure everybody understands the same context, same information, or they're obviously going to make subpar decisions. So clarity is critical. Motivation, there's High Output Management is one of my favorite sort of books about how do you learn to run a high growth company. Andy Grove founder of Intel, talks about how do you distinguish whether you have a capability gap or motivation gap. And the basic question is, if this person's life depended on it, the acid test is, if this person's life depended on it, could he or she do this? And if the answer is yes, then you have a motivational problem. If the answer is no, then you have a capability and skill problem. Mm-hmm. And so the solution to a motivational problem is different than the solution or lack thereof to a skill or capability gap.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Let's pivot a little bit to e-commerce and open store. Keith, just for a little bit of background, Nik and I have just been in e-commerce for a decade. Nik is barely a decade old, so for like a couple of years for him. First, how did Open Store was a collaboration, as I understand it, between you and the guys at Atomic, or Jack at least. Tell me a little bit about how that started and then what your role at Open Store is today.
Sure. So Open Store provides instant liquidity to long-tail Shopify owners. So let's say long-tail, $1 to $10 million GMV is our target market. So these people start a business, it does pretty well, but they may not want to run the business forever. They may confront challenges. They may have other things in their lives. They may have other goals. And we're the only company really that provides liquidity to that market, Shopify and sub $10 million GMV. And then we stitch these businesses together into a large, horizontally broad e-commerce platform with the goal of creating the first horizontally broad platform in the United States since the 1990s. So that's the goal. That's what we do. If people link their data, we will give them an offer within 24 hours and they can decide to accept. We buy the businesses and then we have to absorb and run the businesses. So I serve as CEO. The idea behind the company was actually Jack Abraham. So in December of 2020, after I moved to Miami, Jack had me over his house for breakfast the day before Christmas. And he said, I've got this great idea. And I said, sure, I'm listening. And about 30 seconds in, maybe 3 minutes in, somewhere between there, I was convinced it was a really good idea. So obviously Shopify has been a massive success over the last 15 years. It's the greatest sort of untold story back then, especially because the market cap was like 4x what it currently is. And kind of under the radar, like most people miss the value of Shop all along the way. But Jack was paying attention and he said, there's all these really small businesses on Shopify and they're kind of stuck. They either have suboptimal access to capital. Let's say they know they should spend more on customer acquisition. They just don't have the money. They have to wait for the money from a sale to hit their bank account and decide what to do. They don't have access to cutting edge technology. They don't have all the modern techniques of like quote unquote Silicon Valley. So there's all these limitations. They don't have economies of scale. Think shipping costs. So all of these things can be improved and we can provide them instant liquidity. And as he started talking about the idea, I said, absolutely, that resonates with me. It's a great idea. It should definitely work. And there's so many moving pieces. I like this, but it's also the combination of stuff I've done before, which is long tail micro merchant acquisition, SMB micro merchant acquisition, think PayPal, Square, et cetera, or Yelp even. And then secondly, underwriting an asset, underwriting a business, valuing a business sight unseen is something obviously I've done a few times actually before, most notably Open Door, but also at Square in some subtle ways. So I was like, fundamentally, I'm in, I want to do this, and I think I'll do it myself. So I'm currently serving as CEO of the company. We have 103 employees going to 110 imminently, all based in Miami.
Wow.
What does CEO here mean? Like, are you sort of like, hey, there's different levels of CEO, particularly when you're working with so many different businesses, like someone like you would probably is the role of a CEO to hire and to fundraise, or is the role of a CEO here to also sort of get into the weeds and be like, what does our underwriting look like? Is that good or is that not good? Should we change our target demographic of the type of businesses that we want to buy? What is the role of a CEO here?
So the role of a CEO is always, you're responsible for everything, period. There's no excuses. There's no delegating.
Love it.
You're ultimately responsible for every single part of the business. That doesn't mean you literally do everything with your hands. So you have to decide where to invest your time and your energies. Where do you have a comparative advantage and what's most important asymmetrically create upside or downside? So you want who's filtering what you do But fundamentally, there are no excuses. Like fundraising is part of the responsibility of the team, editing the team, the seams between different parts of the organization, the strategy, fixing, if you don't like the model, fixing the model, figuring out what's wrong with the model, why, is it people, is it process, is it data, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very refreshing and very challenging because it's always something different every day.
So before we get into talking about some of the businesses you've bought, how is this structured? Because I just bought an e-commerce business. The ops part is a nightmare. Dealing with the customers is one thing. Customer service is another nightmare center. Marketing is another piece. How do you structure this 110 people?
So we have a team generically referred to as operations after we absorb and integrate the business that has a marketing function, which has customer acquisition and retention components to it. We have a procurement and demand forecasting function. We have a customer support function. So basically functional units across all of the brands we've acquired.
And how frequently are you acquiring some of these Shopify brands?
This quarter, so Q4, we'd like to do more than one a week.
Yep.
That's the real goal. Last quarter, we were just slightly below that.
Is there a sales team associated with it, I guess? Like,
no.
When I sold my business, I sold it to P&G. There's no sales team. Where's the deal flow coming from? It's all inbound?
Well, we do paid acquisition marketing, but some of it's inbound. We get a lot of organic inbound. For example, people read about Open Store and they're like, yeah, I run a Shopify business. That'd be great. And then we do paid acquisition through different channels, experimentally trying different things.
But no sales team going out calling people saying, like,
no
hey,
sales team.
Do you want to sell your business to us?
First of all, these businesses are pretty small, sort of by definition. So sales tends to work better with larger businesses. B, I have a significant long-standing aversion to sales teams. So I kind of throw salespeople at problems after I've tried everything else in the world.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
Well, have you ever managed sales teams?
Yeah.
Okay. Usually most people know. So, it's just a different skill set. It is very difficult to scale. It's very unpredictable. It has a different culture than like typically engineering, product and design. Mm-hmm. So I prefer not to mix and match unless I have to.
Yeah, it's a little less like productized than other teams.
And it becomes less mathematical.
Right.
When you do marketing, you can use statistics. When you start using high-end sales anyway, you're subject to the whims of one or two closes per quarter, and they all come in the last week. So you can't really run the business with math or statistics, which is how I was taught to run businesses.
And what's the sweet spot of the perfect e-commerce business to acquire, from maybe even purchases you've made that didn't work out or purchases you've made?
We're pretty horizontally broad. So we have some exclusion criteria, but if a direct-to-consumer business with more than a majority of sales on Shopify targeting US customers is somewhere between, call it the very low end, 500K, and the high end, about $10 million of sales, that's right in the sweet spot, ideally with about a year of operating history.
Yeah.
What are the exclusions? You said there are some exclusions that would get you to not buy a business. Is it category? Is it profitability? Is it team? Is it IP? What are the exclusions?
The exclusions are really based on things that you'd probably guess, like content policies you see all across like the internet, like firearms or something like that.
CBD?
Something like that. It's like legal/policy.
Yeah, makes sense. What's the most you've paid for a business?
A few $1 million.
And what's the least?
Low hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. And is it based on EBITDA or inventory? Like, how do you if there was a general equation?
We have a very unique proprietary equation that I sort of literally came up with at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's actually a very true story.
This is right before berries?
I do have I actually have a notepad that I sit next on my nightstand because I occasionally have these epiphanies at 3 or 4 in the morning. And the only way I can fall back asleep is to scribble it really fast and hope that it allows my brain to turn off. So I actually had one of those 3 a.m.s about like how to value the business, which we've been using. We do value inventory separately. So we combine the value of what we think the business is worth as a business, as an operating business, and then on-hand inventory and stitch the two together and make an offer to the owner.
Got it. And what percentage of the offers that you give turn into giving the 20%, and what percentage of those end up becoming businesses you buy?
We basically make offers to what we call GMV qualified businesses, so above 500K, let's say, plus or minus, to more than a majority. And then roughly, depends on the month and the quarter, somewhere between 15 and 25% of them like are interested in our offer and click accept, I want to do this.
And once they accept that, it's basically...
We have a very quick truncated diligence process. When I say very quick, sub 2 weeks, sometimes it's days. So the diligence process was built from the ground up to be able to do one a day. We're not currently closing one a day, but we built everything so that we could streamline the diligence process. So we don't ask a lot of extraneous questions. We simplify to the things we only really need to verify, and then we can close as quickly as possible.
And knowing your brain is very productized, is this all done through integrations and like AI, or is this done by people asking the founders questions? How does that process work?
It's a mix. So one of the biggest lessons from PayPal that made actually Max Levchin really famous, he was on the cover of Wired magazine, for pioneering the combination of math and people. So the things that humans and human brains are really proficient and excellent at, and there's things that math is much better, or AI, if you like the fancy version, are much better at. And the systems that combine the two in some ratio are ideal. So this is how we solved the fraud problem at PayPal, how we built the fraud engine at Square. This is how we do underwriting at Opendoor, is a light interaction. You call it 1 to 5, maybe 10% of humans and 90% plus of machines. And then over time, you're dialing up the percentage that's done with math and dialing down the percentage done by human labor.
Going back to the businesses, are there categories that you like when you're buying a business? So you said, north of 500K in GMV, less than $10 million. Are you category agnostic, or do you care? And that, obviously there's exclusions like the firearms you mentioned, but does it matter if they're selling mattresses versus deodorant?
Nope.
And then does it matter if most of their sales are Shopify versus Amazon?
We're horizontally broad. So we have apparel. I think right now our apparel is probably running at about low 40%, which is very typical for the Shopify ecosystem. We have things
like...
You say
low 40%, you mean low
40% of our brands are selling apparel of some type. Targeting maybe different demographic. We might have men's apparel, women's apparel, children's apparel. We have some furniture. We have like a really cute sofa for kids called Lazy something. We have drones. So we have consumer electronics. So we're intentionally horizontal. I would like to mirror the entire shop ecosystem identically if we can.
What's the goal with going horizontal versus... If you go 80% apparel, you can own that supply chain, or maybe build your own supply chain. If you go 80% beauty, you could build your own supply chain there. What's the point of going horizontal?
It's a little bit of a Keithism, which is borrowed from an Elonism, which is if you're going to build an ambitious business, it's almost as hard to build a $100 billion business as a $1 billion business. So you might as well aim as ambitiously as possible. So we started with the goal is we want to be larger than Shopify, comparable to Amazon retail. So the only way to do that is to be horizontal. And I think it's difficult if you start with a vertical orientation to expand. There are examples in the world. Facebook clearly is the most stark contrast. Started with college, went high school, then went broad. So it's possible, but I generally think that's a bad strategy.
You talked about apparel a moment ago, which I thought was really interesting, that 40% of your businesses are sold apparel, because generally, you're buying these businesses from operators and mom and pops who are thinking about design. You're buying it from a mother who's like creating clothes for babies and thinking about, okay, you know what? We need a pumpkin onesie because this is going to be really cute for Halloween. Are there people on your team doing that? I'll give you an example. Is my parents used to own gas stations and I would work there, and we could run this mom and pop gas station because it was small and we knew the customers and we knew like what they cared about and how to stock the store. But if a big racetrack came in or Quick Trip came in or Flying J's came in, they wouldn't understand the local element of this. They're great on the highway when you have a big truck stop and all you need is gasoline in now, but they're not good for the local environment. How do you guys think about creating onesies that are pumpkins?
We actually do have a really cute onesies brand for children. So if anybody needs holiday gifts for their kids, I highly recommend checking out Open Store.
What's the brand?
I don't forget the name of it. It's I should actually buy it because I have two kids that are pretty much right the same age. But the way we think about it is, first, we can use data to separate out and disambiguate what's proprietary, what's unique and very local in sort of your framework, and what's basically a standard e-commerce business. We don't aspire to ship super creative new ideas unless it's predicated on data. Now, with enough consumers and enough transactions, you do get pretty insightful data about what products are likely to work that aren't currently being, let's say, built, shipped, et cetera. A little bit like how Netflix started repackaging other people's content. And then a decade plus later, had enough data about what consumers would watch, what they were searching for, that with an advantage, with a strategic advantage, they could actually create original content. So that's how we think about it. It's just like the Netflix formulation.
So is this all the groundwork for Open Store to launch its own set of brands eventually?
I don't know if we'll directly launch our own set of brands, but I could see being more excited about acquiring particular businesses and being willing to pay more even because of consumer data.
Yeah.
Now, we may have to, if there's a gap that nobody's producing something and we see that consumers badly want X and would retain, in some unique and differential way, we absolutely could produce products. We do produce some products. So for example, one of our favorite brands is this brand for men called Jack Archer. It's basically like a very high quality Lululemon men's oriented brand, like think pants. Now we introduce shirts, like workout shirts. So next time we go to Barry's, you can wear your Jack Archer shirt.
Yeah. So when you buy these brands and you mentioned looking at the data, like how are you guys looking at the data? Are you replacing the tech stack with your own tech stack? And then you have a team of people, of data scientists or analysts that are going in, or how does that process work?
It's a mix right now. So we keep the businesses running on Shop, but we introduce a lot of new tech. Like there's like a spreadsheet of 12, about 12 columns across and about 8 rows deep of various
And is that
things we're
as
doing.
basic as like customer service and reviews,
Yes.
subscriptions?
Some of it's more advanced, some of it's very basic, some of it's not.
Got it. Okay, cool. And I remember listening to Jack one time. He talked about how they pilot test a lot of the software that they build within Atomic with their network of brands. Is that something that you guys do with Open Store as well?
Not really. There are some innovative things that I want to do, and some of them are live in pilot. Some of them hopefully will get live in Q4 that brands haven't done maybe at all, certainly not the long tail version of the shop market, that we will do from scratch. So for example, we're going to match long tail influencers with long tail SKUs.
Right.
So don't think like millions of dollars, millions of followers, think like tens of thousands, and giving every one of those influencers on any platform, Instagram, TikTok, SKUs that they can promote successfully to their audience and following. So that matchmaking exercise is something we're going to build in a proprietary, unique way.
And how are you going to compensate them?
It'll be some function of sales, but the more important part is the matchmaking, the economics. Actually, there's some pretty standard ways to do that.
Growing your direct-to-consumer business can be tough. Having out-of-date or inaccurate data makes it even harder. That's why I'm using Triple Whale. Their customer insights, attribution, and profit tracking means I can scale my Shopify stores to the moon.
Get a walkthrough on how Triple Whale can help you scale your store. Use promo code SUPPLY15 to get 15% off when you sign up at triplewhale.com. Or you can DM me on Twitter and I'm going to fight for 20% off.
I want to go back to Open Store as a business, I guess. How many stores have you guys purchased? You said your goal is one a week in Q4. Was a little slower in Q3.
I think it's 40 with about 20 in various versions of diligence.
Got it. And then, one of the things that Warren Buffett says is whenever he acquires a business is he's like, we're never looking for synergies, nor do we ever find any synergies. Do you find synergies?
I'd say rarely. I'd say there's insights that might be applied, but not really synergies.
And if that's the case, then what is the goal? I once had dinner with a Thrasio founder, and he's like, our goal is to buy businesses at 5x EBITDA and go public at 25x EBITDA, which is great.
Good luck with that.
It's fantastic. Yeah. That's, and that was a year ago when that may have been realistic and today probably is not. If you're like, hey, look, there are no synergies, so we bought a business at 4x EBITDA, is the goal, hey, look, we can increase top line materially? Is the goal like, hey, we can do the EBITDA expansion? What is the goal once you buy the business then?
So let's say in the short term and medium term. Short term, the goal is to improve things. And so that might be top line growth. So for example, if they're capital constrained, we can invest more money in marketing, customer acquisition with a certain payback characteristic. Yeah. Number two is economies of scale. These people are paying off the shelf, off the rack kind of shipping costs. We clearly can negotiate better shipping costs and pass it on to consumers or profit or both, and probably improve the speed by placing, sort of our distribution centers in the right places so that people get their goods faster. That's an example of top line growth. We can add new channels like influencer marketing that they wouldn't have done. None of our brands basically had their own app. We're going to have native apps for our brands. So there's benefits of native apps to the consumer. Obviously, there's benefits to the company. So all of these things are things that very small businesses wouldn't normally be able to invest in that, we obviously can do.
And so if you look at businesses that you purchased a year ago, like let's say you had closed on them by October 1, 2021, Walmart always provides this metric of what does same store sales look like a year later. You've purchased probably 30 businesses over the past year. So I'm sure your revenue is going up. Is same store EBITDA, is same store revenue up from a year ago to today?
Well, it's a really good question. So we actually closed our first business just over a year ago. We started the company more like 16, 17 months ago, but the actual first transaction occurred in September last year. So there's not that many businesses there's actually very few that are a year old. Truthfully, we screwed up pretty badly the first, call it 3 to 7 brands we bought, meaning we didn't know what we were doing. Like in terms of operations being a mess and complicated, as you said, we didn't have an ops team. We didn't know what ops teams to build. We certainly didn't know how to productize it. We didn't even have an integration and absorption team, which was the biggest reason why we just didn't transfer things correctly. So obviously we built the ability to transfer things correctly. That integration team is running very smoothly. They're excellent. Number 2, we built a demand forecasting team or tool, which allowed us to avoid stockouts. You learn all of these things and then you build. So since March of 2022, we've been building a pretty sophisticated operations team, and it's getting increasingly sophisticated. We now have very world-class people in some of the functions, and we're recruiting for others. So we're getting much, much better. That's actually how I measure the business, is by cohort of when we closed a brand, how well are we doing? The first cohort looks pretty bad. The second cohort looks mediocre. The third cohort looks decent. Last cohort looks pretty good. I want this fourth quarter to look perfect.
I really love talking to people like you who are operating on the next level, because it inspires me to be so much more ambitious. You're like, we bought a few businesses and it didn't work out. I'd be like, I bought a few businesses, it didn't work out. I can't do this anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. And you're like, look, we just got to the next cohort and we're going to keep doing this until we figure it out.
Send all those businesses to us. We'll take those businesses off your hand.
It makes me think about all of the things that I've done where I'm like, I gave up because I just tried a little bit, as opposed to continuing to be like, you know what, I'm going to be an expert at this, and it's going to cost me $5 million or $10 million or $20 million. And at the end of this, I'll have a better understanding of how to run these businesses.
You definitely have to pay tuition learning how to do things in a startup. Yeah. And you can't really do it top down perfectly overnight. You don't want to over-productize, over-engineer things until you really learn how things actually work. Then you want to build a product. So you want to do things kind of in a hack way, a little bit with human labor, and then productize it based upon insights.
The Amazon, like the Thrasios of the world, it's easy to run those businesses because they're generally not doing as much new product development. They're sort of like, here are the products, we're running Amazon ads, and our tailwinds are actually just Amazon. Like Amazon growing, e-commerce growing, and like Amazon growing, and that's going to be the tailwind behind our back that's going to fuel revenue growth and EBITDA growth. Now, whether that holds true or not is unclear, but your business is, someone's got to run Facebook ads. Someone's got to go into Klaviyo or some marketing platform and create an email. Someone's got to play with prices and do conversion rate optimization in a way that you could never do on Amazon. Generally, that is really, really mom and pop based, or like, for the businesses that you're buying, moms and pops have been doing that. And often they've been doing it poorly. But do you have people creating emails? Do you have people running conversion rate optimization tests?
Everything you just named, I'm laughing and smiling because we have a team that's doing all of those things. So literally from integrating Klaviyo to running pricing testing to running bundling testing to lifting conversion by changing various things, we do all of that in a classic Silicon Valley way with engineers, designers, growth people measuring and then rolling it out. I have currently, I think it's 46 engineers. I'd say half of them are working on projects that are related to all those topics.
What's the learning that you realized? So you weren't in the e-commerce business before, right? You worked on projects around it. What are some learnings that you learned, like coming into OpenStore and realizing, why have people never done it this way before?
There's several. So I wasn't in payments before I started PayPal either. So I kind of like new project. I didn't know much about real estate before I started OpenDoor. I did know a decent about recruiting when I got involved in LinkedIn. That was like kind of down the middle of things I'd been involved in. But I sort of like things I don't know that much about. But a couple epiphanies. One was these businesses have surprisingly large margins. I would not have guessed what their margins were, but they're significantly greater. Mm-hmm. And you could talk about why and what that means. But I would have been off by a meaningful amount if I had guessed before starting the company. Second learning is, I think, realistically, that is much harder on operations than probably I would have guessed. Particularly around one or two acute specific parts are really challenging, but we're finally, I think, getting to an answer there. Third is that There are a lot of these businesses on Shopify, but most of them are very, very small. So there's, let's say, 1.7 million businesses, sub $10 million in revenue. But a lot of the 1.7 million is actually sub $100,000 in revenue. So just getting escape velocity to 500K to 10 million is an achievement. It's really a significant accomplishment for the founder.
So you mentioned earlier that for something like demand forecasting, you guys built your own apps. And I know you led the round into Tyto as well, the analytics platform. Is a part of OpenStore's goal to build software and then eventually release that to the world too? Is that a part of the business that you want to build?
I don't know. I wouldn't say never, but in the short term, I think we have two key goals. One is acquire more and more brands successfully, faster, absorb them perfectly, run them flawlessly. Then stitch them all together from a consumer perspective so that we have effectively a decentralized department store where people discover goods at scale that they didn't know they needed. So we're not in the business of a utilitarian search, like, I want diapers. I'm going to go, find that. There's somebody else, at least one other company that does that pretty well. What we want is when you don't know what you want and you get inspired, we want the best SKUs for that. And that's the reason why people still shop in the real world, in my opinion, why roughly e-commerce in the United States is call it 12% and kind of flatlining there is that the serendipitous discovery of goods accounts for a majority of purchases in the United States. So we want to replicate the experience of going to a shopping mall, which is what I used to do, for fun in high school, and where you find things that you wanted, but you're inspired. And that's what we're trying to create. So that's step two.
So a marketplace.
Shipping other marketplace means different things to different people, but effectively, yes. And then shipping software for other people is pretty far off that trajectory. And those things are hard enough, as we talked about. If we get those two things done, I'll be very, very happy in the next 2 years.
Awesome.
Let me take a quick segue into the stores that you guys own. You mentioned that you're getting better in terms of a cohort basis. How much of the store's revenue is dependent on Facebook ads? So for instance, if I turn off all Facebook ads to all of your stores, how much would revenue go down by? 50% or 100%?
Probably 70. So when we look at pricing, typically 70% or so, maybe a little bit more of the customers that they've acquired are direct from Instagram.
And that's actively running today?
Yeah, that's typically what, if you looked at the last 3 months for any of the brands we acquire, and there's very few exceptions.
Do you think about other channels of growth outside of Facebook?
We do, and that's one of the benefits we can provide in terms of top line growth is we can afford to invest in and pioneer some level of traction in different channels and layer those on.
Yeah.
Think of, as I mentioned, apps. Native apps allow you to send push notifications. It's more retention than customer acquisition.
Sure.
But you could also theoretically add features into those apps that would lead to customer acquisition too.
Are you building your own apps or are you using a company like Tapcart to do it?
We started with Tap to test just to see how it would perform. But we're building our own apps and we've shipped some, but we'll be building everything uniquely proprietary for OpenStore.
Have any of the brands that you've purchased, I was going to say, have they grown by 10x, but you've only been doing this for a year? Have any of them grown 5x since you bought them?
Not 5x. And that's partially not our goal. So we are not, although my day job is to be a venture capitalist. I'm a VC and I am looking for the proverbial 10x growth, ideally right after I invest, which almost never happens. But, the 10x growth over some, compressed period of time would be wonderful. Our business at OpenStore is not predicated on finding these outliers and having 1,000x growth offset mediocre performance. This is not a power law business that we're trying to create. I do that the other days of my week. Half my days a week, I'm running OpenStore and we want to be accurate and grow everything consistently. And then the other days of the week, I want to find power law outcomes.
Have any of the businesses that you purchased been shut down? Have you guys been hey, we bought this business and it turns out
I think there's one.
And how much do you invest into a business before you decide, let's either not consistently invest new money into this business and just let it run, or let's shut it down?
The shut it down is would be a very rare case. It would be there's something fundamentally wrong. The product doesn't work as described, the chargebacks are insane, returns are too high. Something a little bit off, not just it's not growing.
Yeah.
We've maintained all the other brands and we invest in all the other brands. So we're not looking to, reprioritize or anything like that. But if we did see that we couldn't deliver an awesome customer experience, we might rethink a specific brand.
Sure.
Okay, I want to pivot to some financial stuff at this point because I know we're going to run out of time pretty soon. One is, if you had to guess, what would be the average multiple paid on an EBITDA or revenue basis for the business, for the 50 businesses you guys have purchased?
So we don't actually use that as the formula, but I can tell you the answer is about 2.
2x EBITDA
Yeah.
or 2x revenue?
2x EB.
2x EBITDA. Okay, gotcha. And have those multiples changed from a year ago, or they're pretty similar?
They went down, then a little bit up. So they were a little bit higher
Okay, got it.
about a year ago. Then they went down, and then they're a little bit higher right now. But I actually don't calculate. I only calculate this in hindsight.
Yeah.
So out of curiosity, then actually that's not what our model is predicated on.
I mean, 2x EBITDA is amazing. How do you finance the purchases? I know you guys have raised something like $140 million. I think you closed another round, nearly $1 billion valuation several weeks ago. Are you guys using equity, debt, or a combination of both?
We use a combination. So we've raised about $155 million in total across multiple rounds.
Yeah.
We do finance using a combination of equity and debt. Hopefully over time, more and more debt, less and less equity.
And how much, like, what is it, 50-50 equity debt? Is it more equity? People who buy homes from Open Door, I bet, are doing 80-20 because that's pretty classic when it comes to real estate.
I think that's where we want to be.
Businesses.
Historically, we used a lot of equity, partially to just prove that we could do this. So it's easier to get debt once you prove operating track records and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So debt people are pretty conservative by definition versus equity people who are taking risk. So you kind of need to use a lot of equity up front, but then we had a debt line, and we recently upgraded the debt line. So we'll be using more and more debt now prospectively.
Do you use fixed or floating rate debt?
The first debt facility was probably fixed, but I don't even remember because it was done before you had to worry about these things. The second one definitely floats. They typically float off LIBOR, so it definitely floats.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some more. We're going to get into some more general questions from e-commerce. What are some businesses that you guys don't own that you really admire in the e-commerce space?
I'm not really sure because I don't have access to their financials. So if they've pitched me, I may have an opinion, but that's a very small set. So companies I love and have been involved in, like Think Fair, which is an e-commerce marketplace connecting long-tail brands and long-tail retailers. Phenomenal business, phenomenal team. I've been an investor since 2015 when they started the company. So that's a unique and very compelling value proposition. If I'm not really sitting in a room and hearing about the economics, the CAC, the payback period and stuff like that, it's really hard to evaluate from afar. So then my only prism is products I like. E-commerce products I buy. And I can give you,
what are some products you like?
Yeah, so like for example,
give us 2 products that you like.
I've discovered on Instagram. Now I'm shop Instagram all the time. I have a custom pillow that I discovered that it's actually pretty good. I have this new 10,000 brand athletic wear. It's actually really good.
Yeah. Great product.
So I wear those all the time.
That's my shirt, actually. I love 10,000.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the guy, I know you worked at S&C. The guy who started 10,000 also worked at Sullivan & Cromwell.
Really? I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah,
I'll have to look him up. Yeah, not that many people escape S&C and become business people. So that alone is an accomplishment.
That's right. Is the market? Let me ask you another question. Is the market treating e-commerce fairly based on where Shop is? Allbirds IPO'd at $4 billion, is now $400 million. Hims was, I think, $2 billion, now under $1 billion. Shop was, $150 billion, now $30 or $40 billion. Is the market valuing these businesses appropriately or incorrectly, in your opinion?
Most e-commerce businesses, I would say, is evaluating correctly. I think Shop is potentially undervalued in some ways. I think partially, they were traded at a premium like many financial services companies where a lot of their revenue growth had been in embedded finance. And as embedded finance became less cool and attractive, it's affected their market cap. I don't totally understand why they're, actually down like 80%. I'm not exactly sure why. I think Shop has a, very high potential future, but I do think a direct to consumer brand, best case is you're looking at 1x revenue.
Direct to consumer brands should be valued at about 1x revenue.
That's like best case.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you said you were surprised that the margins in e-commerce were as high as they were. What are the EBITDA margins that you're finding, and what did you think that they would be when you
were looking? So let's start with like gross margin kind of level.
Sure,
easily 50 to 60%.
Yeah, but that's
higher than I would have guessed. Especially for like less optimized businesses in many ways, where the cost structure doesn't reflect economies of scale. Secondly, contribution margin, which is what I really care about, is all over the map. Depends on how effective their ad units are, really. And we do see some brands we look at have extraordinary performance on Instagram. Click-through rates 2, 3, 4 times normal.
Yeah.
And so therefore their contribution margin may look very attractive actually.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so when you said you thought the margins were better than you expected, it was really gross margin you were talking about.
Gross margin was much higher given my amateur impression of the market for these products.
On that, where do you cut most of the fat? Like when you buy a business, where's the fat sitting that you cut and you're able to increase the contribution
Well, I would
margin?
say shipping, definitely.
Okay.
And then sometimes we're dialing up marketing spend. I'd say 30% of the time, the founder is under investing in customer acquisition. And then actually about 50% are pretty much triangulating right about where they should be on a CAC payback basis. And then about 20-30% might be paying too much. And so they might dial back their marketing.
Yep. And with Open Store and the future of the business, what's the goal? Is it an IPO?
Well, yeah, we'd like to be an independent public company and the reason for that is, first of all, we do use capital, like whether it's debt or equity or the combination. So the more capital and access to capital under better terms, that typically is correlated with a public company. So that's one reason. Second reason is we want to build an iconic company that persists. And basically once you build a public company, the likelihood that you're a 30, 40, 50, 60-year company goes up dramatically. And so since we want to put a stake in the ground, we want to build something that has permanent value, about the only real way to do that is a public company.
All right, Moiz, any last questions before we get into the lightning round?
No, we've got 5 minutes left. Let's get
Okay.
into the lightning
All right.
Fire away.
Keith, we've got the lightning round. Quick answers, whatever's on your mind. All right. First one, double floor.
No, never. Only when I'm sick only if I'm sick or injured.
Do you have any mentors that you've looked up to? Do you have any mentors today, or are you the mentor today?
I wish. I would love to find one.
What would you look for?
Someone who would challenge me the most in different dimensions. I mean, they could be mentors in different fields or whatever, but challenge is the best and most important way to grow. I did learn the most over my career from Peter Thiel. Like most of my views about how to build companies, how to value companies, how to invest in companies are derivative in one way or the other from a lot of Peter's views. They've been often remixed. So I have my own views that he actually might not agree with, but the foundation, it's like a really good song. The foundation is really something he said once.
Got it. How do you manage all the businesses you're running at the same time?
Great question. Fortunately, I have a wonderful friend who's doing it right now extremely well. And the key is to hire key deputies for him, like 5 or 6 key deputies. We have a few in place, so we need 1 or 2 more.
And are those like general managers?
No, they're functional experts. So like, for example, we have someone running fulfillment who's world-class.
Got it. Okay, within the teams.
We're looking for someone on the customer acquisition side, maybe 2 people actually there.
Is there one level higher though, where you have these deputies across Open Door and Open Store and Founders
Probably
Fund?
not, although I'm willing to experiment and try it and just see how it compares.
Okay.
What business do you spend the most time on today? Or like these days, I should say.
Oh, Open Store by a lot. So fortunately, I have an EA and a chief of staff, and they combine to measure my calendar and audit my calendar, like I recommend for most executives. And in Q1 of last year, it was 33% Open Store and 2/3 everything else I do. So boards, one-on-ones with CEOs, new pitches, founders fund stuff. Q2 is actually 50-50. And when we do the math on Q3, I suspect it's going to go up from 50-50. And that doesn't even include weekend times, which are mostly Open Store.
Other than the businesses you're an investor in, what business is undervalued in your opinion?
Well, I don't think there's any tech company that's really undervalued right now. I still think there's more harmonization and that valuations are still too high. So I suspect the market...
Facebook? Even Facebook, you don't think
Facebook's massively overvalued. They have no ability. This metaverse thing is silly and ridiculous. They have no ability to do tech innovation. They have the wrong team, wrong culture, probably wrong CEO for that. And so fundamentally, Facebook's inevitably going to run into a hard wall.
Can't they just be AOL? Like, $350 billion valuation, $50 billion in cash. You're talking about 300. Be AOL dial-up. Just go like this, and that'll be,
Facebook has to go that way. Partially regulatory reasons, so they can't acquire their way out of the problem, which would be in fact, that actually is Mark's strength. Like Instagram was a brilliant acquisition. It was brilliant at the time and it was brilliant today, but those moves aren't going to be available in the next few years. And they've never been an innovative company. They haven't shipped an innovative product successfully since the wall. And you might remember back from your Tiny Code days and my slide days. So the ability of the culture there and the team there to innovate across technology is not going to happen, and they can't recruit because of the political perceptions of the company. So yeah, I'd be very dubious about the future of Facebook.
Okay, final question. When someone's pitching you, what gets you excited about the business? You mentioned earlier that you think 50% of your friends should basically be laughing at you. What are the metrics? You're looking at talent. You're like, one of the interesting things that I once met Jack from Atomic, and he's like, we don't invest in people. We actually invest in the idea.
Yeah, he's the opposite.
In the business
literally
itself.
Atomic
he is the opposite.
It's literally the opposite of my strategy.
What gets you excited here, I guess? Is it just the people? Are you sort of like, hey, this product isn't going to matter as much?
Well, I do like impact. So I do filter, just because I have a scarce amount of time in my life, all things being equal, something that will positively move society forward is something I'm more interested in and just allocating my own time and energies to. But from a pure investor, quad investor standpoint, it's finding some undiscovered talent that I think has a non-zero probability of changing the world and giving them advice, money, some of their fuel that enables them to increase the probabilities of success. That's the most invigorating thing on the planet.
Awesome.
What's really, I appreciate that answer. That's a great answer. I guess from a KPI perspective, the one thing I've been surprised about is listening to this conversation and preparing for this interview. I've heard you talk a lot more about gross margin and contribution margin than EBITDA than I expected. I would have expected at some point you would have been like, EBITDA is what we look at. And you mentioned you buy businesses on 2X. But when you talked about e-commerce, you're like, gross margin is higher than I expected. Contribution margin is all over the place, but not EBITDA, which generally I found to be in these small businesses to be in the 10 to 20% range. It doesn't vary that much in from an EBITDA perspective, but your KPIs have generally been gross and contribution based on this conversation and a conversation on CNBC I saw a while ago.
But there's two reasons for that. So one is being a venture investor. By definition, there's no reason to look at EBITDA. You're never going to invest in an EBITDA positive business as a seed or Series A investor, maybe not even Series B. So it's kind of irrelevant. And so you have to develop other ways of evaluating a business. So it's kind of silly. Like there's no such thing as a venture investment with a positive EBITDA. Like eBay might have had it in the last 50 years, might be the only business ever. So it's just a ridiculous concept for VCs. Number two is I think it's actually fundamentally unsound to look at a business that way. The reason why is if you understand gross margin, particularly contribution dollars, you understand the levers. Like the bottom line, EBITDA doesn't tell you anything about what levers to pull.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The more intermediate metrics tell you what you can do differently. And that's the goal. If I was an executive, the goal is to improve the company. So I need to be able to have KPIs that tell me where to look. What levers might I toggle that would change the outcome? Looking at some synthesized bottom line number, it doesn't help you determine anything. And the last thing is Peter has this philosophy. It's derived from him, which is basically once a company starts increasing EBITDA, it means they have no growth and no innovation left. It's like the last refuge for founders and CEOs. So the last thing I want to see is increasing EBITDA until that business is way into its future. So anyway, for all those reasons combined, I'm not particularly interested in EBITDA qua EBITDA.
Got it.
Keith, what do you want to plug for everybody listening in the e-commerce, DTC, CPG
obviously,
world?
If you run a shop store and you don't want to do this for the next 40 years of your life, we'd love to look at your data, give you an offer in 24 hours and make your life easy.
And what does that process look like? You just go to openstore.com?
Go to openstore.com, and all you really have to do is connect your shop. We will ask you some financial metrics that shop doesn't track, but there's different ways of doing that. You can provide a P&L, you can screenshot a P&L, you can answer a little quiz. That's enough to get you an offer.
I think it's open.store, by the way. It's open.store.
It is open.store.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But if you just email me, Keith at Founders Fund, I'll make sure you get an offer.
Boom. Your inbox is about to be flooded.
That's all right.
All right. Anything
thank
else,
you very
Moiz?
much for this, Keith. This was amazing.
Cool.
Really interesting to hear about your perspective on e-commerce, mainly because I think it's a very different business than you've invested in the past, where these are smaller businesses that you're acquiring, a very different business model where you're basically opening up a Blackstone, but for very small mom and pop shops. And interesting to see that. And also so refreshing in terms of ambition. I remember the time when we had lunch, I was working at Simpson Thatcher. I had no idea what the world was like.
I remember.
I was a year or two into Simpson, and I was I have no idea what to think about. Listening to you here, I feel like everything I'm doing is not ambitious enough, and it really inspires me to go think all the businesses I'm running are looking at EBITDA on a quarterly basis, or like, I'm an owner and are looking at EBITDA on a quarterly basis. And I'm like, why aren't you fucking increasing this? And now I'm like, why don't we increase top line right now? And we'll worry about EBITDA 5 years from now.
Cool. Great.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Keith.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next time to cut through the noise in CPG, retail, and e-commerce.
And if you enjoyed this episode, then why not share it with a friend? And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss the next one.